to the second of our faculty lectures in the history department. And we're very happy to be able to bring a colleague from not so far away, Victor Ostaphchuk from the University of Toronto. And I have to say, over a decade ago when I came to Canada, I was very relieved to find that Victor was going to be the closest Ottomanist to me. Victor and I represent a very small group of scholars who study a very big place that still remains to be understood in its complexity and diversity. Most of Victor's adult life has been trying to study this huge entity, but especially the most remote and difficult part, which is, one might say, the Turkic-Slavic interface in the northern parts of the Ottoman Empire, which, as you can imagine, requires an enormous amount of linguistic training and background to deal with. His scholarship, his interest in the area was piqued at the University of Chicago, where he studied as an undergrad with the doyen of the field, Halil Inalcik, and then he went on to Toronto, where he could specialize in the region of the Ukraine. For 6 years before he came to Toronto, he was actually division head of the Institute of Oriental Studies in the Ukraine, in the National Academy of Science in the Ukraine, where he hoped to help to revive Turkic studies in Eastern Europe, where it had languished for all sorts of political reasons. Now that he's been at Toronto for these years, he's nurtured a new crop of students across Canada. So his research is sort of at this intersection between Slavic and Ottoman studies and, of course, world history, and focuses on the borderlands. And he uses a variety of methodologies, including archaeology, GIS, as well as classic documentary evidence, as well as chronicles, in order to document these very complex relationships at the borderlands, which don't fit into neat ethnic or religious boxes. And indeed, he studies both several types of mobile groups, Cossacks on one side and Tatars on the other, Crimean Tatars. And what we'll be hearing today is an elaboration of research that is ongoing on the Cossack groups in this area, and the way that, despite these, our understanding of this sort of Muslim-Christian divide, these groups flitted inside and outside in order of two different realms, of multiple realms of empire and state building, in order to maintain their autonomy. And so his talk is Cossack Ukraine in and out of the Ottoman orbit, 1648, 1681. And Victor asked me to be short, so I turn it over to him.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about something that I've written about, but I'm going to give you a lot of background too, which I'll rush through in the beginning. Don't get scared. I'll go very far back, because as I said in the preface of this, to understand what happened in this period of Ottoman active policy, you have to understand the region, its history, and impact its history had on consciousness of, say, the Ottomans, for example, their experiences with peoples of the northern Black Sea steppe, specifically the Cossacks. So,
Victor, sorry, if you could just speak up, or I can give you a mic.
okay, I'll speak up, and if
okay.
I can give you a mic.
Okay.
So in the second half,
The microphone's on as well.
is it on?
No, not that one, sorry, this one.
This one's on.
There's a.
Oh yeah, but it's not actually broadcasting.
No, I just need to record it.
Right. Oh, okay.
There you go.
So in the second half of the 17th century, there was a huge upheaval in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth when the Ukrainian territories ended up revolting, and there was, and I won't go into the reasons for this, or social, economic, political, but it basically transformed the international order of Eastern Europe. Yet after this unleashed a generation of war that brought that virtually destroyed the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which was practically the largest state in Europe at the time, and brought in the Crimean Khanate, the Ottoman Empire, Moldavia, Transylvania, Muscovy, Russia, and even Sweden into this. into this whirlwind of events. And this is what brought the first Muscovite Russian Ottoman war encounter. I don't count the one in 1569, the Don Volga campaign. That was really not directed at Muscovy. So by the 1660s, the Ottomans felt compelled to intervene, and we'll get to why. So just a bit of background. The reason we're talking, going way back to Khazar times, and then we come to the Kievan Rus, the Kievan Rus Empire, which was based around Kiev, but actually controlled all of Eastern Europe, but not the steppe. This is at its height, just on the verge when the Mongols came in the 1240s. This, of course, changed everything. The steppe, which Kievan Rus had tried various times to control, basically was able to split here, actually this is not much space, revived itself, and the areas of Kiev, the forest steppe, almost controlled by nomads. You can see this is the Great Eurasian Steppe, where Ukraine is the western end of it. Some nice shots of the steppe. The steppe is not just flat. This steppe is not just flat land. It also has a lot of terrain, a lot of rivers, so-called ravines or yars. So here just some of it's quite treacherous. So it's not exactly open flat steppe. And of course the kurgans and these which are scattered all over Ukraine and southern Russia. And you can just have some of these are put by the Kipchuks and earlier. When the Mongols came, they stopped using this form of burial, and so-called stone babas. And Kievan Rus was constantly fighting the Mongols, the nomads, and they had a series of walls, which are shown in these lines, called the snake walls, or Zimiewe Vale, which some of them still survive. This is the scheme of it. So this basically gives you a notion of what reason the place we're talking about. The Mongols basically changed everything. Now I had one slide here out of order, so I'll just have to go back to Lithuania. Okay, which the 14th century especially was the century of Lithuania. This is when these pagan tribes in the north basically took over this Baltic to Black Sea area from the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which was largely a East Slavic state. The Ruthenian or Old Rus language was its state language, and but the ruling elite was Catholic, was converted to Catholicism, and Poland at that time was a minor part, and you can see the Grand Duchy of Vladimir and Suzdal. Muscovy also was a minor power at this time. I have my pointer here somewhere, yes. So this brings us to the Ottomans. Okay, I told you I didn't want you to control this. This is a crucial thing. What happened with the fall of Constantinople? Mehmed very quickly took control of the Black Sea by a series of expeditions. First, and they basically kicked out the Italian trade colonies there that controlled the trade in these various, taking over port after port. And by 1475, took over the southern shore of the Crimea and Azov or Azak. The situation was, they were faced, it was a relatively easy takeover, except there were problems with Moldavia especially, and the Crimean Khanate was a successor state to the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan, a higher prestige dynasty than that of the Ottomans. The Ottomans were basically very smart not to try and move into this zone because it's steppe land. They had bad experiences with the steppe already, with Timur, for example, that is the invasion and destruction of the First Ottoman Empire. So they were very smart to take over the major ports here, the trade ports, eventually also Akkerman and Kilia in 1484 under Bayezid. And they made a wonderful relationship with the Crimean Khanate, a very, very good fit it was, because the Crimean Khanate supplied them with slaves,
the raids into Poland, Lithuania, most of the Ukrainian territories, and into Muscovy, alternatively. And this is what a huge slave. I mean, this is compared somewhat to the Atlantic slave trade. It was a very, very huge factor. But if the economy was not just that, it wasn't the mainstay, I would say. But the Ottomans having basically come in here first, they basically locked out the other powers. I remember I showed you Lithuania had gone from sea to sea, and there was a conflict over the left bank of the Dnieper, that is the right bank, there's the western part. The right bank is looking downriver. And because Lithuania controlled this, and once Poland and Lithuania merged, eventually by 1569, there were conflicts over this territory between the Dnieper and the Dniester rivers. But the Ottomans basically locked out the northern powers out for 300 years by having this wonderful relationship with the Crimean Khanate, gave them this active buffer zone. Basically, the northern policy was controlled by it. It had its own foreign policy. It was a vassal state, but it was subsidized by the Ottomans, as a matter of fact. It didn't have to pay tribute. So this sort of sets the stage for the Ottomans basically had a great deal. They controlled the Black Sea, they controlled the trade. This helped Istanbul become one of the largest cities in Europe by the 16th century. Raw materials, foodstuffs, and slaves. And whenever they did go into the steppe, for example, the Don Volga campaign of 1569, it was a disaster because of the difficult conditions in the steppe. Other times of active policy, the Khotin campaign in 1561 was basically a disaster that led to the unseating of Sultan Osman II. So they knew enough to stay out of the zone. And it was always a problem for all the armies, from northern armies, even up by Peter's time, crossing the steppe was a problem. Except for the people of the steppe, that is the Tatars and eventually the Cossacks. And it's the great irony that this Tatar pressure, constant raiding in this area that shows the Black Sea, sort of the Black Sea system of the Ottomans and their trade network. So yes, 16th century, you can see the Tatar raiding. Now, this, the great irony is that this Tatar dangerous steppe, this desert, it's known as the wild field or the Loca Deserta, brought about the anthropological and ecological adjustment to this, where the rise of these Cossacks. And the word Cossack is, of course, is a Turkic term. Kazakh, it means freebooter. Basically, it meant actually it was a political vagabond, someone that leaves the system he's in, goes out into the wilderness, usually the steppe, but it could be mountains or anywhere, raids caravans, gathers men through a retinue, and with gaining wealth and success, has charisma, and then comes back in and takes over again. My Korean graduate student, Zhu Yupli, just wrote, his thesis was about the phenomenon Kazakhlik, which was a post-Mongol phenomenon in Central Asia. That's why you have the Kazakhs called Kazakhs. But he also included the Ukraine and Russia here, the Eastern Slavic Kazakhstan, and it just came out on Brill just a few days ago. So pass this around. So the Cossacks were, the Slavic Cossacks, East Slavic Cossacks were this is of course a very famous painting by Repin of the Zaporozhian Cossacks writing a letter to the Sultan, which was apocryphal. They call them all kinds of nasty names, the whore of Babylon, and you can kiss us where the sun doesn't shine, and so forth. It's actually apocryphal, but this it's a very evocative picture showing how rough and rowdy these guys were. And notice they used gunpowder weapons. They were very important as an infantry, especially. The whole horseman thing is another better version of it. It's been very loved and it's been reposed many times. And now you have today with the war with Russia, you have They're writing a letter not to the Sultan, but writing a letter to Putin. Here's one. This looks very staged, actually, but this is one from the front, with the posing in the same poses, writing a letter to Putin. So this shows you. So these were these are nobles, that were Cossacks, the runaway serfs, the whole spectrum. But what's important is going into this wild field. They had a ecological niche there, thanks to the river, to the Dnieper River, which is kind of this very rich. The land is of course rich, very rich kind of Amazonia, but with steppe instead of forests. But not only there were forests there too, but they were protected. This is what we call a refugium. It's a place of we talk about nomads. We use this term, like the Mongols, the old Turks and the Mongols. They had a refugium in Mongolia over the Gobi steppe where they could flee and be safe. And basically this lower Dnieper region here, there were a bunch of cataracts here of the Dnieper which made it virtually unnavigable except to the Cossacks. So you have some old maps, map of Beauplan from the mid-17th century. This is Loca Deserta or Dzikie Pole, wild field, here and here. So these cataracts were from the Polish-Lithuanian side. This kept them. Here's a mapping of them. It kept them basically, gave them some remoteness. These were all flooded in the 30s and make these great seas. So it was a tourist attraction in the 19th century. You can see. Oops, this thing is Wi-Fi thing keeps coming up. I wonder how it could. Yeah, and now it goes from current slide. Okay, it'll go. There's a from current slide thing. So yeah, each of these cataracts had a name. This is the most serious one called Nenasitis, or the insatiable one. These are old photographs. And this region also was kind of a water roll. The Veliki Lug, or the Great Meadow. This flooded in the spring. It was full of hundreds of rivers, rivulets, islands. Just to give you a notion, there's a very good quote from Beauplan, the French engineer, who in the 1630s and 40s was an artillery officer for the Polish army, and also fortress constructor and map maker. And there's some regions of this still left. Most of it's been, and the various Zaporozhian sieges were after the cataracts. The first one was here. So the siege was their camp, their stockade. And by Khmelnytsky's time, it was already Chortomlik, kept moving south. But this whole region was basically, I have a great quote here from Beauplan's, this is the second edition, 1660, first one 1651. He wrote our best description about the Cossacks and Tatars that we have. And a lot of what we see in Ottoman documents actually confirms what he says about their warfare on the sea and so forth and in the steppe. This really tells you everything you need to know about this area. The thousands of islands and so forth where they keep their booty and where they live also. And in these places, this is a 18th century quaint translation, English translation, the original's in French, of course. In these places, it is that all the power of the Turks can do no good. Many Turkish galleys have been lost there as they pursued the Cossack returning from the Black Sea. I'll get into the raiders in a minute. For being got onto this labyrinth, they could not find their way back, and the Cossack with their boats played with them, drawing them in athwart the reeds. The reeds were very important for Cossacks. They hid in the reeds. Ever since the galleys did not go up to the river, up more than 4 or 5 leagues, and so forth. And they have many of their cannon. None of the Polanders could find them there too, for besides they do not go to those parts, and so forth. And this is where they have lots of cannon and so forth. And every Cossack has its own particular hiding place for their pillage and spoil. So this gives you a sense of this refugium, this region. How the Ottomans, of course, were we have this intriguing map from the Topkapi, which is probably 17th century, but it's basically, it shows this is Kiev, this is the Black Sea, and this shows they've fallen off, but this is where the rapids are. And apparently it was some kind of a plan to blow up these rapids so they could sail up to Kiev. This is the impression we get from this document. The Ottomans were great engineers. They wanted to build a canal between the Don and the Volga, which didn't succeed, between Sapanja and the Black Sea, and they were very much into this kind of things. They were great builders, but this never happened. But the Cossacks, this is the founder of the Zaporozhian Sich, Dmitro Vishnevetsky, who was a nobleman, very prominent in Ukrainian folklore. What I wanted to talk about is again, infantry. They were this is musket-bearing infantry for the most part. These are some late depictions of Cossacks, but I call this all in a day's work. Of course, a Tatar or a Turkish head. They were fierce enemies of the Tatars and Turks until the 17th century. And they were important as infantry. As I said, this is the tomb of, or the heart of Jan Casimir is buried in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. This is showing a battle of Berestechko, which the Cossacks actually lost to the Poles and their German and other mercenaries. But you see here the very, very good depiction of, oops, the wrong one, of the Cossack infantry here in 3 rows and getting ready to fire, and just a guy there, I don't know, whipping them or controlling, telling them to move on. I think I have a closer one here. Yes, you see. It's excellent depiction, which was on the poster. They were very good at fighting with the wagon camp, this little Tabor or Wagenburg, which supposedly the Hussites were famous for this. The Ottomans adopted this as well. But they say that this actually goes back to the Kipchaks. They also had a similar. This is basically taking lots of wagons, latching them together, using cannons, and this made them basically impenetrable. They could fight many times more their attackers. They were again the Cossacks as horsemen. There are many images of them as horsemen, and that's for the Zaporozhians. I wouldn't go over man. The Don Cossacks, the Russian Cossacks, were much more into the steppe and as famous as horsemen. The Zaporozhian Cossacks were most famous for their infantry, and for their musket-bearing infantry and artillery tactics. But they also had a career. This is another wagon camp. It was movable in the steppe. They were, this is a movie depiction. They were also famous. This is amazing. These peasants and landlocked people living in this water world of the Dnieper and the great meadow. They developed a naval capability, developed their own boat called the Chaika or Shaika in Turkish, which was remarkable because it had no keel, so it could float in rivers and shallow water, but it had reeds attached here, these fascists of reeds, which made it virtually unsinkable, and they were seaworthy. Rudder on each end for quick maneuverability. About 20 meters long, 20, 30 meters. They're big. This is a longboat. I mean, it's called almost like a Viking ship. Crew of 40 to 60 Cossacks. Lots of room for booty. No bottom. So in the 16th century, this career in the Black Sea starts, first just in the north, and eventually on the Rumelian or the European side, and fighting the Ottoman fleet. They were very, very capable of fighting the Ottoman fleet. They had small falconets, basically it was from boarding and sneaking up on them at night and so forth. This was very important because the Ottomans, I mean, you have the destruction was immense. The Black Sea, up until this time, the Ottoman Sea really wasn't, the Black Sea was an Ottoman lake. And this is how it's always called in the literature. In fact, by late 16th century, and especially in the 17th century, it was no longer controlled by the Ottomans. This is an authentic 1621 gravure of a raid of Kaffa. So you can see lots of action going on, these small Cossack chaikas and Ottoman galleys and people jumping up and jumping into the river, into the Black Sea, and scaling the walls with ladders. This is a very nice depiction. This is an Ottoman miniature showing a battle between the chaikas and the Ottoman galleys. This brings us to where, and this steppe was considered very dangerous. I mean, Evliya Çelebi talks about this is a place, it had a name called Heyhat steppe, which means probably in Arabic means keep out. And there were spirits living there, genes. Tatars would often be captured by Cossacks and put in their boats and lost, and so forth. So it was a very, one of the most dangerous places in the world, you could say. Now, and by the 1620s, the Cossacks were, they made an alliance with the Crimean Tatars against the Poles, and the Tatars against the Ottomans, and they were basically very confident players. They started having international relations, contacting other powers, and also tied it into how they're different from the Russian Cossacks. The Don Cossacks, as my former teacher, Alexander Bennigsen, said, Don Cossacks were more of a gangster operation. I mean, these guys were gangsters too, were pirates. But by this, they got involved in this Ruthenian, Ukrainian cultural revival in the 17th century with the fight of the Counter-Reformation and the Catholic press on the Orthodoxes. But in 1621, the hetman of the Zaporozhian Cossacks signed the entire Zaporozhian host or army into the Kiev Brotherhood, which tied this religious movement, anti-Polish movement, together with the Cossacks. So now the Brotherhood, the Orthodox movement, had an army. So and revolts. By 1638, the Poles put down a very serious revolt, and there was 10 years of peace. It's called the Golden Peace. And Khmelnytsky's revolt. This is again the raids. Oh yeah, this is just shows you the kind of damage to the Black Sea. The Ottomans were very, very wary of the Cossacks. I mean, you see here, this is some of the major towns that were attacked or sacked or destroyed, and there are many small places, even up until the Bosphorus in the 1620s. So with Khmelnytsky's revolt, it was originally over a private matter. A Polish noble took his wife, but then he goes to the Zaporozhian Sich, and the Cossacks revolt, and they defeat. The key was that Khmelnytsky sends agents to the Crimean Tatars, to Islam Giray, and gets support of the Tatars. And this would be a constant important factor, is that the Cossack infantry in combination with the Tatar cavalry was a very strong, powerful combination. And I'll make a series of in 1648, a series of spectacular defeats of the Polish army, the Polish-Lithuanian army. And the dean of modern Ukrainian historiography, Mikhailo Hrushevsky, whose books, I brought a copy of this. This is 10 volumes. It's very, I'm involved in the project of looking at the Ottoman side of this and fixing it up. It's translated now at Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. There are 10 volumes. Almost all of them are out. It goes from the beginning, from Kievan Rus times to 1659, 2 years after Khmelnytsky. But this, the reason I'm showing you this gives you a good, I mean, it's full of sources, very thick history of Ukraine. It really shows you what you call Ukrainian, or whatever you want to call it, Ruthenian Ukrainian historical process, which is a history of quite thick and full, very, and of course different from Polish or Muscovite history. Hrushevsky shows some of the battles, some of the over the years. Hrushevsky very astutely pointed out the systems that he had available to him, the international systems. There's a book which just came out a few weeks ago, Stories of Khmelnytsky. This is basically looking at the literary legacy, looking at the chronicles as well as his depictions in literature, the problem of the many, in this revolution, this is the bloodiest revolution in Europe for sure, where many Jews were killed, many Ukrainians, units, people that were not Orthodox, joined the Unit Church, and of course Poles, and of course the Tatars. The Tatars, one of their incentives for coming up here was they were allowed to take slaves, and of course Khmelnytsky tried to have this taken on lands he didn't control, but he often had to turn over his own territories for plunder, for slavery, which is of course very problematic. But this is a very good volume. It treats some of the Jewish chronicles that describe these events, and so I recommend it. Anyway, Hrushevsky astutely pointed out the systems that Khmelnytsky had to choose from. One was this anti-Catholic bloc of Orthodox and Protestant states: Muscovy, Ukraine, Moldavia, Wallachia, Transylvania, and Sweden. So he could have brought together this anti-Commonwealth alliance as one of his possible choices. This could even accommodate the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which was largely Protestant as well by this time. Its elite was heavily Protestant. Another was an anti-Ottoman coalition involving Moldavia, Wallachia, and Transylvania that were subject to the Porte against the Ottomans and the Crimean Tatars. Though the Tatars could have been part of this too, because they had their problems with the Ottomans. A European Catholic alliance, involving Venice, Poland, Lithuania. Before this revolution broke out, Vladislav IV, the Polish-Lithuanian king, he wanted to have a Turkish war. This was his major ambition. The nobles and Magnus were against this. This is, of course, a very strong noble Magnus state. And they were against it because they were afraid of him becoming too powerful. And so his scheme was to get the Cossacks involved, to encourage them to raid the Tatars and the Ottomans and provoke a war. And this was his great plan. And so this was always a chance that there could be things to be reversed. Things with Poland could be patched up and they could rely and go have this Turkish war, which never happened because but the situation with Poland was quite bitter. I mean, it was very soon it was clear that there wasn't going to be any kind of rapprochement. Anti-Muscovite, a possibility in Ukraine and the Crimea with Poland. And the Crimea, halfway through this movement, actually switched sides. And once Ukraine and the Khmelnytskys it became too powerful, went to the Polish side. And so, let's see, I'll just do this. And I should turn it off, but it's too much trouble to find it. So from present slide. Yes. And of course, then there was the Ottoman system, which is very attractive, because Moldavia, Transylvania, Wallachia had a lot of autonomy. And the thing about Khmelnytsky is he participated, especially the two systems he operated in was the Ottoman system, especially in the beginning, and then the Muscovite one, which was very problematic for him because Moscow did not want to get involved at all. They had peace with Poland, 1630. They lost a lot of territory to Poland. They had a grudge, but Poland was much more stronger state than them, and they were very wary to get involved with either Poland-Lithuania or with the Ottomans, who were also much more powerful. And so Khmelnytsky's game was basically. I'm going to cut a lot of this short because I want to get to basically his main thing was to get the Crimean Tatars to aid us and communicate with the Porte. And he communicated from 1648 probably, certainly from 49, regular expeditions going back and forth of envoys going to Istanbul and from Istanbul to Chiherin, which was his capital, right here by the Dnieper, or Chehrin, Ottoman. And so this is 1648, after his great victories against Poland. He comes into Kyiv and he has this tumultuous reception, which he really didn't expect. I mean, the churchmen, the intelligentsia, he realizes this is not just another Cossack revolt, this is something very big. And this is when he started thinking about a separate state, a Ruthenian kingdom, a Rus Kral, which the Ottoman sources refer to, but impossible to do without help from an outside power. And the problem with the Ottomans was that they were involved in this is an opportunity. Basically, Khmelnytsky was handing them Ukraine on a golden plate. But they were involved in this horrible war in the Mediterranean over Crete from 1645 to 1669. And there was actually a pro-Khmelnytsky party led by Bekta Shagal, head of the Janissaries, and there was a pro-intervention Ukraine party, but it lost out basically by 1651. He's out of power, and we have these letters. This is what, and we have copies of some of these other ones. And basically, he's saying yes, we're ready to take you into servitude, into Ubudiyat and Kuluk and so forth. They're always saying, make sure you don't raid the Black Sea, and you make your armies available for us. But they really were very wary. It seems by 55, there is the Ottoman chronicles talk of him getting the investitures of power, the two or the horsetail pole and the banner, and in any event, he used this, being a very wily, not just a military genius, but a very wily politician. He used this to blackmail the Muscovites. And basically, when by 1653, already the Zemsky Sobor decides, Sobor, which is the gathering of the nobles, decides to take him under their suzerainty, and it says in the documents, otherwise they'll fall to the Crimean Khanate and the Ottoman Porte, and that would be very bad news for them if the Ottomans actually got involved actively in the northern Black Sea. So this Khmelnytsky uses in 1654. We have the famous Treaty of Pereyaslav, which is very much exaggerated in its importance. It's just the beginning of Ukraine's coming into Muscovite suzerainty. It's a very long and tortured process. It took 150 years. I mean, it was not until 1774 that the hetmanate which was a separate polity with its own laws and so forth, was eliminated. But throughout this ensuing period, after Khmelnytsky, it was known in Ukrainian historiography as the ruin, there were wars from all sides. Poland was getting back the right bank, or the western Ukraine. The reaction of the Ottomans to Pereyaslav is interesting. There was virtually no reaction. There was a note in 55 saying you should leave the Muscovites, or else we'll go with war against the Cossacks and all of our armies. But they really didn't seem to take it seriously. And again, it was to them quite clear that Khmelnytsky was playing games. He was all at the same time while he had made this solemn oath to Muscovy, he was calling himself an Ottoman subject and writing to the Porte. This has been called by a Ukrainian historian, Taras Chukrib, as polyvassalage, which I find problematic because, I mean, it's in effect polyvassalage, but it was not a system where he was allowed to be. It was not any kind of condominium or several powers at the same time agreed to have him as a subject. So I'm going to skip the 1660s largely because this is after Khmelnytsky. There's an attempt, the next successor, Vyhovsky, makes a treaty with Poland, this attempt to patch things up, and the Treaty of Hadyach, which is a town in eastern Ukraine, 1658, realigned the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth into a tripartite, Kingdom of Poland, Kingdom of Lithuania, Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and Grand Duchy of Ruthenia, or Rus. So this was going to be the solution, and that would have been the end of the Khmelnytsky revolt, and it would have been the end of the whole thing. But it was too much bad blood. It didn't last. In the meantime, in 1659, Hetman Vyhovsky, with the Crimean Tatars, destroyed the Muscovite army at the famous Battle of Konotop. And there's this constant. I'm going to move to Khmelnytsky's son, Yuri Khmelnytsky, who was basically a non-entity. His more talented son, Timish, was killed in Moldavia. This is Khmelnytsky's idea of, he forced the Moldavian voivode or hospodar to give his daughter, Roxanda, in marriage to Timish. And basically Khmelnytsky intervened in the Moldavia, basically sent his armies and took it over, and which didn't please the Ottomans. But in the end, Timish was shot. It was killed in a battle, and this is a huge tragedy. He was a very talented, apparently, something along his lines. And his young son, Yuras, called Khmelnychenko, was basically a non-entity, a very poor leader, which suited the Ottomans, as we'll see later, and of other powers as well. So by 1667, there's basically this is the the so-called Treaty of Andrusovo, which divides Ukraine in half between Poland and Muscovy. West Bank, the so-called right bank, goes to Poland, Lithuania. The left bank, or the western part of the Dnieper, allied with Kiev, go for a couple of years, goes to Muscovy, and there's no room for the hetmanate. This led to a very terrible, a very, very negative reaction in Cossack and Ukrainian society. By this time, the hetman is actually, Kuninsky will come back as Hetman Doroshenko, who is in control of Cheherin in the south and most of the right bank. He turns to the Ottomans, and the Ottomans at this time just nearing the end of this Cretan War, and they're very receptive to his entreaties. We have a series of letters. This is a copy of the original Ottoman with the tuhra chopped off. It ended up in Moscow because Doroshenko ended up submitting to Moscow in the end. But this is a copy in the Ottoman archives. And it's a remarkable document. Some highlights. I mean, one thing is it's taking all of Ukraine basically. The Sarikamish, that is Zaporozhians, the Barabash, which is the left bank and the right bank the left bank and the right bank Cossacks, and compares to Moldavia, Wallachia. He requests the horse-tail banner and the standard, the LM and the banner. To rule as a sanjak over these three regions, as one Ottoman province, guard defending, and of course keep order and discipline and so forth. This was with this at this time, this is 1669. The Poles are making an attempt to go back to counterattack, and they set up another hetman. Khanenko. This is a time to spin the ruin. There are several hetmans. The Russians have their own hetman on the left bank, and there's Doroshenko, and then there's on the right bank, this time Khanenko. The Poles make a campaign against Doroshenko, and he appeals to the Ottomans. And this is by 1669. The Ottomans are finished with their Cretan war, which they win. And it's a question of why didn't the Ottomans intervene earlier? It's true they did intervene sometimes before. They slowed down the Cretan War and intervened in Transylvania when they had to. So it's not 100% clear that they didn't. We don't really know why they didn't when it would have been much easier for them to do it. But in any event, a major camp. There's this is a document from the Chronicle of Silachdar, which to the Polish Chancellor, which is quoting the Polish Chancellor: "The country of Ukraine, Ukraina Memleket, is our hereditary possession, and its people are our subjects." It talks about the revolution, the 20 years of fighting that went on, and that these people are seeking a protection of a padishah, like Alexander, i.e. the Ottomans. Though the Cossack dominion have for a long time themselves been a separate people, by way of accord, entered into obedience under you with guarantees. I was talking about the liberties, it's very interesting. And so they remained for some time, finally became able to bear the oppression and encroachment and tyranny and torment you have rendered them, which is contrary to the treaty and compact between you and them, the Cossack people with their possessions and souls, and so as to defend their country, have in totality withdrawn their obedience to you and taken to the sword to do battle and make war with you, and so forth and so on, and come into our. This is basically a declaration of war against the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They say that you wanted to come back. Now, after all this time, you want to come back and take this country. It's yours. Bring in your judges and your administration. And this is. As of the people who have renounced obedience to you for so much time and endured being in the middle of battle and war with you, they are our subjects and can only be correct by a forced interpretation of this rejection of the Polish claim to right bank Ukraine. And so this is the horsetail banner. There's several of these museums in Kiev that the Ottomans granted Doroshenko and Khmelnytsky. So the Ottomans declare basically Mehmed, who was a very unactive, Mehmed IV, a very inactive sultan who, this was his first major campaign. And they march on Kamenice, on Podolia, this region here. It's by the Kamenets Podolsk, which is close to the Dniester River. It's on a river called the Smotrich, which is, it's an amazing site that it's in a gorge. The river just sort of makes this loop around this gorge, and this is actually a small part of the fortress. This is the new part, 17th century edition. And there's an old picture of it. There's a map. This is the river. It cuts this beautiful canyon gorge around this site. So the so this campaign is in the fall of 1672 is successful. One thing I didn't expect to say, in this documents that took Doroshenko under the Ottoman protection, there's one interesting thing is there's no mention of haraj, of tribute, which is supposedly any dhimmi, any non-Muslim state should be, or entity should be paying. It never comes in, it never is mentioned. It's not clear if this was a temporary thing. Some thought this is the case, that eventually would be brought in, but there was no talk of tribute, which Moldavia and Wallachia and Transylvania did have to pay to the Ottomans. So with this conquest of Podolia, now it's interesting, the Ottomans did not, Doroshenko was very disappointed because they didn't give him control of his territory. They took it themselves and made it into an Ottoman sanjak and did the usual thing. They surveyed it. This is a survey of Podolia that Dariusz Kuldejic published with my help. That gives you the typical, they go through and go from village to village and map out all the tax resources and to establish timars. So they basically turned it into a regular Ottoman province. And you can see that by the names there, it was basically 99% Ukrainian in this area, except for the towns, which had Jews, Armenians, and Poles. They gave him, eventually they gave him part of, when I talk of Cossack Ukraine, I usually mean the territories under control of the Cossacks. That is, the central areas, Kyiv, Chernihiv in the West Bank, in the left, in the east, Bratslav, part of Podolia. They gave Doroshenko part of Podolia to control during his lifetime, but basically they let him keep his realm, but they were not willing to let him control Podolia. And so basically the notion is that they probably thought that they tried to encircle Moldavia, and eventually the typical Ottoman policy was to eventually take away vassalage and make it turn provinces into regular Ottoman provinces. This may have been the strategic goal. It was a very, very strong strategic position they were in, controlling this fortress and this entire eyalet of Podolia, which was basically a period of warfare until 1699. I mean, they were with the Poles, but they did control the area around Kamenets. So this, after this time, they basically ended up campaigning in Ukraine for 7 straight years. The critical year was 1674. They came close to a direct military confrontation with Muscovy, the Ottomans. Moscow was hoping that Doroshenko would betray the Turks and pledge his allegiance, but there was a left bank hetman, Samoilovich, feared to be replaced and went against Doroshenko. And eventually Doroshenko ends up being besieged by the Muscovites in Cheherin, so the Ottomans come with the Sultan, move into Ukraine to save Doroshenko. And there's an unsuccessful siege in 1677, and the successful one in 1678. Now the key here is, first of all, we don't have much proof of this, but there's a notion that there was a kind of a Turcophilic, pro-Turkish, not just amongst the elite, but also the population. They were aware of the Re'aya, the subjects had a very good tax deal with under the Ottomans and their autonomy. And this was lost, I'll just come back to this, this is Mehmed IV, and Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Grand Vizier. He was a brutal, he had some brutal tendencies, and when he came in 1674 especially, he destroyed a lot of towns that rebelled, that had gone over the Muscovite side, and made harsh reprisals. He was of course allowed to do this because in Islamic law, if you rebel against the Darul Islam, you have a right to be subject to enslavement and violence and so forth. But in any event, this turned the population very much against the Turks. In all fairness, Doroshenko himself repressed a lot of towns that had rebelled against in favor of the Muscovites. So what's interesting here is that Doroshenko, in the end, finally he gives up and submits to the Muscovites. He gives them lots of information about possible routes for the Ottomans of conquest going towards Kiev and so forth. And he's actually treated quite well. He's sent off to Central Russia in exile where he dies, but he's forgiven for his betrayal or whatever. So what's important here is what the Ottomans do. They put Yuri Khmelnytsky, the nonentity son, again as hetman in place of Doroshenko. They go on, once they take Cheherin, this capital, they destroy it. I mean, they destroyed it largely in the siege, but they level it completely. In fact, Khmelnytsky himself asked them to do this. And then they go around destroying all the other fortresses, many of the other fortresses in right back Ukraine, leaving him in the middle of about 300 kilometers west as his capital. Basically, what's the crucial thing here is that the Ottomans are turning this into a frontier zone. Okay, they don't want to occupy central Ukraine. They basically are satisfied. They're thinking in terms of their old passive Black Sea policy of controlling the coast, having the Crimean Khanate as a strong active buffer, and making sure that no strong power comes into being. It's also the interest of the Crimean Khanate, which whenever the Hetmanate became too strong, they would switch to the Polish side. First of all, this is where they got their slaves, and secondly, this would be a very dangerous power to them. So this is the crucial thing, that they're basically not interested in forming any kind of an entity here. And what did they do is, by 1681, with the Treaty of Bakhchisarai, which was confirmed in 15. Well, anyway, they basically, with the Muscovites, they decide to. The right bank is controlled by the Ottomans, and the left bank by the Muscovites, and the region of Zaporizhia, where the Cossacks lived, was supposed to be like a neutral zone controlled by nobody. Some sources speak of it that the Ottomans were interested in controlling all of Ukraine, but that one of their negotiators, the Moldavian on and off again hospodar Duka, George Duka, was playing two sides and not interested in this hetmanate. He wanted to actually have contact with Muscovy, and he would subvert the messages. So it's not clear. But in any event, what ends up doing is the Ottomans patch things up. They hang on in Podolia for another quarter of a century, sort of, till Karlowitz. But they having this strong position here, they pack up and leave and go to fight the campaign in Vienna in 1683, which was a much probably more dangerous, more difficult place to be. But it just shows you this old Ottoman policy of their interest of expanding in Central Europe and the Mediterranean and in the East, but not moving into the northern Black Sea steppes area. You can. Yeah, I've mentioned the problem of polyvassalage. So this is, of course, this is basically a failure of this Ottoman-Ukrainian venture, you could say, which was a definite turning point because Well, an independent Ukrainian entity, as per se, did not come into being, or one strong enough that along the lines of Wallachia, Moldavia. There was the Hetmanate under Muscovy in the Russian Empire. But the Ottomans, this is eventually this old keeping this old passive Black Sea policy was the origins of the ruin of this, because it meant eventual confrontation with the Russian Empire, and the Ukrainian Cossacks were quite adept at fighting in the steppe and fighting with any side. They ended up fighting on the side of the Russian Empire, and played a major role in this conquest of this steppe area and elimination of the Crimean Khanate. So we can't say what if, but this was certainly a geopolitical turning point. Thank you. Well, this is Cheherin, actually. The fortresses are very impressive, but there's nothing left of it. This is the siege with the Muscovite armies here, left bank Cossacks here, Ottomans here and here, close up. And Patrick Gordon, the Scottish engineer who was here, described some of these things. He made a map of the fortress, very interesting. Yes, this is 1681, which doesn't show the lines actually, but anyway. Oh.
Thank you very much, Victor. And if you want to answer some questions, I'm sure there's some questions from the audience.
Thank you. That was a really interesting talk. This is obviously an area that's far temporally far from what I do. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, I mean, the talk suggests that there was a much, I mean, even if the Ottomans were reticent to get involved beyond the port areas, so there's a much greater possibility of some kind of Cossack Ottoman, that this region could have been part of a very different historical trajectory than integration with Moscow. And I'm wondering how that possibility has been dealt with in the Ukrainian historiography.
Well, yeah, there's the typical. I don't want to get into this, but there's a lot of lament about this. I mean, one thing I made a big point about that this was a place that was not very conducive to campaigning with large armies. It's dry, steppe, dangerous. But the other thing, the Ottomans, they were experts at moving armies. They were way ahead of the Europeans in supplying armies. Depots ahead of time with food provided and so forth along the routes, and they were quite impressive at actually moving across this region with this huge army and taking Cheherin. So they could have held on if they really wanted to. But the other problem is that we always did often contemporaries are smart and they know better than we do, and probably there were other reasons for that. This making a strong presence here would, of course, have meant that they would have prior to peace Poland, Lithuania, and Muscovy, who were at various times were talking about uniting. Because the Crimean Tatars these were very brutal slave raids and so forth. They were constantly raiding, a real thorn in their thorn. So there was an urge to eliminate the Crimean Khanate and to come to the Black Sea. But so that perhaps the Ottomans this is the perfect setup for them. What they thought. But yeah, obviously things could have been very different, and there was a constant rebellions after this. Under Mazeppa and so forth, his connections with Sweden and then with the Ottomans again. So this card was always there, and the society was relatively divided. It's really very clear that the Muscovite society was very different from Ukrainian society. Ukrainian society was connected with Poland, had the Renaissance influences. Catholic influences, a completely different political culture. So when the Muscovites came from Zappa and signed the treaty, this was supposedly a submission, whereas he thought he was making a deal with an equal, and there was misunderstandings. There was some of the points of the Perry-Sov treaty would change later on in March, and eventually there was another version of it. There was this huge clash of cultures. So the interesting thing is that actually it's the Ukrainians' own fault in a sense, because they informed the Russians that this is we belong together. They have to come to help us. There's a church in Kiev and all this Kievan heritage, and they got the Russians who were really not at all really wary of going down. They were more interested in the east and just
where they were. I mean, Siberia. So there's no fault for bringing them in and convincing them that this is where they should be. Yes.
Yes, thank you for a really interesting talk. And again, it's also temporally very far away from my own period, but I'm curious about the hetnet and how you describe it, because of course, again, this might be just my own ignorance, but you know, we start off, or we have an image of the Cossacks as a kind of anti-state people, right? A rebellious people sort of brought together by these runaways from various classes, people who like to live on the borderlands. But the hetnet seems to be, in your depiction, to be quite a state system.
Yeah.
With foreign policy, and I mean, presumably some
It was basically
form.
a military dictatorship. It was known. The state was known as the word Ukraine was used, but also it's called the Cossack host, voice Zaporozhye, and it was basically you have these social movements there. I mean, I can't stress enough how in the 17th century, especially, Ukrainian society was Cossackified. I mean, this was a big problem for Poland. I mean, there was a steppe nearby, you could run away there, and of course the magnates were moving and then trying to take over this territory and have serfs, and there's this constant struggle. Once this is a truth in history. I mean, the Jalides in Anatolia or mercenaries in Europe. Once peasants take up the gun and start living by the gun, they don't want to come back. You can never bring them back to plow the land and pay taxes. And so but so the Cossack officers, they supported an elite, and they were in some. There was a social cleavage, especially in the 18th century, between them and the peasants. Who can be a real Cossack? Because not only originally the Poles tried to make people going back to being peasants, but also the Cossack elite did this. And it was unstable. Hetman, suppose it was elected by votes and so forth. He had to refuse 3 times, and then he would be accepted. But and there were problems. That there were several hetmans at the same time. That was, of course, a big problem. But it was very much a polity state. I mean, Ukrainians like to call it a hetman. It's an artificial term. It's not used in historiography. Though it's come to play. That's why I use Cossack Ukraine more often. But yeah. Yes.
Sort of following on from that, because it's really interesting that the freebooters, military dictatorship, and these cleavages. That it's interesting that is there an explanation for why? I mean, why they seem to maintain such a cohesion? That they, because you see there's this central cohesion around, and they play off the Rus and the Ottomans, but there doesn't seem to be a major split amongst the Cossacks. And I'm just wondering, or at least maybe I'm just missing something.
I didn't. Yeah, there were. I mean, no, there was. I mean, there was this part controlled by Muscovy that was. Doroshenko was not able to. He was for a while able to unite all of Ukraine, but not for long. He. Maybe I've. It's just I haven't gone into this period it's really wretched as far as geography. That's why it's called the ruin. It's very hard to keep track of who's there doing what.
Okay.
It's not really my I'm more into the earlier period, the early 17th century and earlier. But I did want to try to understand why. I mean, I think this is the first one to explain why the Ottomans did get involved and why involved the way that they did. Yes. Yes.
It sounds like this period is a bit of a departure for Ottoman policy. Is that the case? But I'm wondering why you alluded to the curiousness of imposing very sort of special Ottoman provincial relations rather than the kind of techniques for some sort of semi-autonomous incorporation with paying tribute and the like that was the case in Transylvania and I guess was it Wallachia?
Wallachia and
So it just sounds like a very strange departure. Firstly, that they got involved on the other side of the Black Sea very directly, and then secondly, that if they were going to get involved, why did they decide to go so ambitiously and try and set up the Sanjak type administration?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You don't really see, I mean, there was this mention, we have the documents, but you don't really see in the Ottoman, one of the problems, the Ottoman sources are really wretched from this period too, unfortunately. There aren't that many of these documents. There's some big gaps in the Muhima, the minutes of the Divan, Imperial Divan, my sense is that the Ottomans were sort of they were really, I mean, they were playing along, and they were kind of, just like Muscovy, they were blackmailed by the Cossacks. Cossacks will say, well, if you don't come to us, we'll join Muscovy and go to war against you. They're ready to go to war against anybody. And they were kind of blackmailed into getting involved largely. It was either do or don't, be out. And the Ottomans, I have the sense that they really didn't take this Cossack entity very seriously. It was just too unstable, too difficult, too far. If they were really, again, it's really important that they went around destroying all the fortresses instead of making this a forepost that they could have a province. So that's my impression, that it was very touch and go. And that's why no Haraj. I mean,
Doesn't that make it more strange that they're sort of attempting as if they're really incorporating? I mean, that seems very fictional if it's really if it's so.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I have to look into this. Somebody wrote to me that Wikipedia, there's a big discussion about this in an article relating to this, because someone's quoted me and they said that it was treated as an Ottoman Sanjak, like this, and I don't really go all that far that it was definitely integral part of the Ottoman Empire. In this discussion, it just wasn't enough time for this whole thing, and the situation was just much too unstable.
Just following up on that, Victor, I mean, in contrast to, the way that they went in and they surveyed Podolia, which they never did in Wallachia. They were basically told they were not allowed to station, as far as I understand, even station troops, right, in the Black Sea provinces, even though they were tributaries,
Right,
etc.
right.
I mean,
Well, not in Lincoln, but of course
Yeah.
on the mouth of the Dnieper they had the
strategic.
The strategic forces kept
Yeah, but they never
Cossack.
surveyed, so it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
this reversal where they sort of regard the headsman as incompetent in some ways
Well,
of
they-
governing.
First of all,
And so they have to sort of supplement them to prop them up, maybe.
Well, yeah, I mean, but they wanted to control Podolia because it was very strategic. The thing is, the interesting thing they were doing, this was like, they weren't doing surveys anymore in the 17th century.
Yeah, no, I
right? And they went through the motions, but then all of a sudden they did it in Uvar also, in Novi Zamkin's place, when
Yeah,
in
and Tabriz,
Slovakia, they did it there.
in Azerbaijan and
It was some of the, in Tabriz, there was some kind of a imitation revival going back to the old days, the way they ran things. Though they did actually have Timars there. But, I mean, this steppe zone was not really a place to establish. Ottoman administration really did mean setting up the Timar system and having these spies, this cavalry that would collect taxes, peasantry, and go on campaigns. There really wasn't anything there to make Timars from. I mean, this is a steppe largely, wild region. If they went further into Ukraine, that would have been a different story. It was an ideal frontier, can I say?
The other question I had also was to, since this is sort of the other side of the wars of religion, how, we talk about basically Podolia or Vienna, which is sort of the other bookend of the wars of religion, of how this sort of interacts with what's going on in Western Europe, and the role that the Ottomans are playing or had played up to that point vis-a-vis Protestant powers in the region. So, was that sort of religio-geopolitics of Europe playing into this strategy in any?
They certainly were aware. They were very good at propaganda, religious propaganda, and they were certainly aware of the Orthodox tensions with Catholic Poles. It's something that they it really fit well into their playbook, the situation to use. But in the end, they didn't. Podolia, also the control of Podolia was very, very reticent. It was very on and off. There was constant warfare going on. They had them legally till 1699, but for half of their territory was constantly raided by the Poles. Yes.
Were the the Ottomans able to benefit in any way by controlling the region? So instead of taxing it, were there some other resources?
Yeah, well, they originally, this is, I mean, controlling the trade there, this was their private sort of, to compare it, some diplomats talk about the Black Sea is like the Sultan's harem. He would sooner let an outsider go into his harem than into the Black Sea, you know. This was a private sort of treasure of the port. The trade was artificially, it's an old situation. Whenever there was a strong power in the Straits, when Byzantium, the trade would go into there. If it was a low power, when the Venetians took over in the Fourth Crusade, in 1204, there's a weak power in the Straits. The trade was forward to the Mediterranean, as far as Italy and so forth, foodstuffs, grain and so forth. And so the Ottomans, that was their it's always been a quandary why there wasn't, suppose in 1648, Khmelnytsky made an agreement with the Ottomans, and there was a trade pact made, which we have a Polish document from. It's a very, very contentious issue whether this is for real or not. But it would have been ideal because this train of the Ukrainian grain, so this was mostly going into Poland and going to the Baltic. This was the way and why wouldn't it go in the other direction? I mean, it's much closer and so forth. So there was this, but it never really happened again at this time. It was just their control of the Black Sea coast.
So some resources did start going south? More than
Potentially, we don't have any reference of it. I mean, there was constant trade. I mean, Muscovy was very important for them because for trade, it was state trade. It was the source of they had a world monopoly until Canada came along and furs, and furs were very important for ceremonial reasons. For these khalats that would be given, the robes of honor that would be given, the sable furs. This goes back to Baghdad, the Caliphate. I mean, the Bulgars, but and also birds of prey for hunting. So this is a very old. I mean, I didn't really say this, but this notion that the Russians, Muscovites, and Tatars were old enemies and so forth. But it's a myth that the Ottomans and the Muscovites were pretty much distant friends. They had very good relations. They were just too far away from each other of course the Ottomans, the Muscovites were interested in, as with Safavid Iran, they were interested in textiles and in all kinds of luxury items that they would get from the Ottoman Empire and Safavid Iran, and so this bitter warfare that is in the 18th century is a very new phenomenon. This Chechen campaign was sort of the first accidental case of it.
Just getting to a different topic, but maybe it's related a little bit to what those resources were in the region. You talked a lot about the Crimean Khanate's importance for raiding enslaved. And it just made me think, especially since you had that gravura plate of the siege of Kaffa, it just reminded me of Kaffa as this important Genoese port originally for the slave trade from the Black Sea, during the 12th, 13th centuries, basically. So I was just wondering a little bit more about the dynamics of that slave trade. And normally when we think of the Ottomans, I mean, at least from the classic kind of simplistic Ottoman history, I know, usually think of the Devshirme in the Balkans and their incorporation in Janissaries and in administration. What is the sort of relationship with slaves from Crimean raiding? Where do they fit into that kind of Ottoman economy?
I mean, a lot of them ended up in the Crimea. Evliya Chelebi talks about, that if the slaves working in the fields, and if the slaves arose, there would be no chance for the Tatars. There's many more than there are. It's interesting, Crimean Tatars, the ones that are from the city are very Slavic looking, and the ones that are from the steppe are very Nogai, they look like Cossacks, and they're very Eastern looking. So there's this thing that the life is not so bad. I mean, this Ottoman slavery, a lot of people. It's a very famous incident when one of the Cossack warlords goes into the siege into Crimea, Sirkov, really messed things up for politics of the Hetman. But And he asks, he liberates these people, and they at the isthmus they say, we have families here, we want to stay here. And he said, okay, and you can go back. And then he had them all slaughtered. And of course, and they ended up, in the the famous Suleiman's wife, Roxolana, who was from Western Ukraine, my documents to show where she's from. I have some another different talk, but so there was that. But there was a real tension because the Ottomans, in general, they more or less wanted to have and had good relations with the Commonwealth and with Muscovy, but they needed the slavery. They were very dependent on the slave trade. So they would always tell that any touches would traditionally raid one side or the other, and then they collected tribute from both of these countries, gifts from their side was tribute, and if it wasn't paid enough in time, then they would raid. This goes back to the Golden Horde relationships with these subjects territories, but the Ottomans, there was this constant tension of where to, it was really problematic for their policy but yeah, as far as numbers go, I mean, yeah, the slave trade, we have. If you look at some of the Ottoman registers, very few of these, but there's one register in the beginning of the 17th century, customs register, and every other slave is Cossack. It's Cossack. Often they call them Rus, which is Ukrainians, or Moskov. That's the main distinction. And they also describe their looks and so forth. And in the sigils, in the Qadi sigils, you have lots of in the Crimean ones and Ottomans, you have lots of Cossacks, slaves. The Cossack came to be enslaved as well.
But they mostly stayed in the Crimea, those slaves?
Not well. We don't have the figures. Traditionally, we understand that Kaffa was considered the greatest port in the Black Sea. It was a very rich place. Muslim, Jewish, Armenian merchants involved in slave trade, and it was huge. As far as there's estimates made that there were from Muscovy alone in the first half of the 17th century, 200,000 slaves taken. So it was a huge. My assumption is that, well, I can't say.
But they did take over. They took over the medieval slave trade that was already developed by the Genoese. It was a major Yalta.
And Cossacks also, by the way, I have a lot of. I work most of my work. Much of my work has been on the naval raids, naval traditions. They also, first of all, well, this whole thing historiographically is Christians fighting the Muslims and so forth. And that's really overdone because the Cossacks in the Black Sea, I have Ottoman documents talk about Christian communities that lost their churches and burned. Varna, for example, the jizya payments fell by half after Varna was raided one of the times in the 16 teens, and the Christians asked for a lowering of their jizya. So but they also, you have in the records of them taking slaves, bringing women and children in their boats across the Black Sea, and the Ottomans often capturing and liberating most of the So there was Christian sources don't usually talk about slavery and so forth. And there's one nice mention in Beauplan that he says that many of the Cossacks they sell these or they donate or sell these slaves to Polish landlords. But in general, the sources are very mute about this whole about that phenomenon. Yes.
I have a question about the Russian infiltration into the region.
Mm-hmm.
So after the conquest of Kazan and Astrakhan, we know that the Russians would come soon to the region. What role did the Cossacks play in this? Like, would they, according to the situation, ally with the Crimeans, or would they make Russian infiltration into the region easier?
Well, it's a different time. I mean, it's middle of the 16th century, 1552 Kazan and 1564 Astrakhan. The Cossacks were just coming into being, and it's true that I showed a picture of Dmitry Vishnevetsky, Cossack fighter, the nobles funded the siege. He was in the 1660s. left Poland, Lithuania. It's actually a Lithuanian novel. Up until 1569, this was Lithuania controlled all the way to the Black Sea, and it was only in 1569 that Poland got all the Ukrainian territories. That's why the Ukrainians and the Russians diverged, because the Belarusian stayed in Grand Duchy of Lithuania. But he went over to Muscovy, served Muscovy, and raided Azak for a while. And it's said that he went to the Ottomans. And this again is the notion of that's not polyvassalage, but apparently there's I don't really know this. Maybe the people from European speakers. Apparently, a noble had a right to leave a sovereign, go to some other sovereign, and then he could come back. Because he came back to Poland eventually, and there was no problems, you know. Sort of is right. But so they would. I mean, of course, in conquest of Siberia, the Don Cossacks and the Ukrainian Cossacks were very much involved in moving into Siberia. With these gunpowder weapons, there was no. The Tatars there were no match for them. It was very quick moving across Siberia. But in general, I mean, the first Cossack Crimean, there was typical in the steppe. You have raiding together and so forth. But it was only in the 1620s that there's a very serious actual alliance between the Crimean family and the Zaporozhian. Doroshenko's grandfather, Michael Doroshenko, was a hetman that was actually killed in the Crimea, and the Cossacks were to save Mehmed and Shahin Giray, brothers that were rebelling against the Ottomans. That was kind of a turning point. I mean, it was a very powerful combination militarily, and all of Europe took notice. The British talk about, the English talk about, the French. Various powers interested in this happening or not happening. That the Ottomans having this block against the Cossack Tatar bloc, and so this, of course, paved the way to the Khmelnytsky. I mean, there was already a tradition of alliance since Khmelnytsky's first move was to go and ally with Islam Giray.
Any other questions? Victor? Okay. So
Well,
again,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Questions.